Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article 3 courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases.
Now, there's a significant moment that often crops up in disputes between powerful government figures and federal courts. It's a turning point where things go from mere civil disagreements and procedural squabbles to something much more serious. When the court begins viewing a government official's dismissal of its orders as not just a compliance headache, but as potential criminal activity, things get real. This shift could end up leading to criminal prosecution and even jail time for the specific individuals involved.
So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article 3 courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination.
And this moment has come for Stephen Miller, who serves as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the President. He's known as the mastermind behind one of the most aggressive and legally contentious immigration enforcement agendas in recent American history. This serious turn hasn't emerged from any sort of congressional action or media pressure. Now, before all this unfolded, the disputes between the Trump administration and the federal courts regarding immigration enforcement were dealt with through the usual civil contempt process.
Fox News went absolutely crazy because they got upset that we called out Stephen Miller. And in fact, we used this image of Stephen Miller to emphasize the terror that he was causing. And in fact, Jesse Waters and other Fox News podcasters and right-wing media personalities get upset every time that we call out Stephen Miller. Let's be very clear. This is one of the most dangerous men in the administration as it relates to violations of the Constitution.
But that's changing thanks to a recent legal opinion that suggests there's enough reason to believe Trump administration officials might face criminal contempt charges for ignoring court orders. This is significant because it distinguishes between simple political spats that officials might navigate through media management and partisan loyalty, and the real danger of criminal charges that could land top officials in federal prison. In simpler terms, what has happened here is a pivotal turning point.
Now, at our first hearing, we documented how Secretary Noem has been lying when she has talked about not arresting American citizens or detaining U.S. citizens. At our second hearing, we talked about immigration enforcement and how agents have been brutalizing, blinding, beating, and killing Americans and others on the ground.
The language in the judge's opinion is crucial because it separates the more manageable political controversies from the serious legal repercussions that these officials now potentially face. Being held in contempt of court carries a weight that may turn their political challenges into a much bigger legal nightmare. Judge Bosberg has taken a bold step that really flips the script when it comes to how the courts are dealing with the government. Until now, the focus has primarily been on civil contempt, which generally leads to fines and procedural consequences aiming to nudge the government into complying with court orders.
Well, the judge fined Trump $10,000 for violating a gag order after he appeared to reference a court clerk. The judge held the surprise hearing just moments ago and warned the consequences will be worse if this happens again.
But what Judge Boasberg has done is move from that civil path to the much more serious territory of criminal contempt, which opens the door to federal prosecution and potential jail time. He's officially documented the shift in a written opinion that's now part of the federal court's permanent record, citing probable cause to believe that certain high-ranking officials in the Trump administration have committed criminal contempt. These aren't just any officials either. We're talking about big names like Attorney General Pam Bondi, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, and President Donald Trump himself. It's honestly hard to believe he called them out like that, directly linking them to willfully ignoring a clear federal court order.
That's right, Joe. This case took a sudden, dramatic turn late this afternoon. Now, this whole thing lasted about a minute. But yes, Donald Trump was called to the witness stand about 90 minutes ago. The judge ordering that Trump be placed under oath and asked specifically about a comment that he made to reporters here during a courtroom break late this morning.
This distinction between civil and criminal contempt is essential to understanding the significant impact of Judge Boasberg's decision. On one hand, civil contempt encourages future compliance, while on the other, criminal contempt punishes past wrongdoing. By taking this stance, Boasberg is changing the landscape in a way we've not seen before from a federal judge confronting this administration. The potential repercussions are no longer just about political embarrassment. They might involve serious legal consequences for some of the highest officials in the land. There are definitely some major hurdles left before we see any real criminal consequences for Miller and the other officials named in this situation.
He is terrorizing communities. He is sending ICE out across this country, and he's willing to destroy the law and our Constitution so that he can move forward with his own bigoted worldview of how he views our country. And he is accused, not just Democrats, but folks across this country, of putting immigrants ahead of American citizens, and that is a flat-out lie.
Just because a judge has found probable cause doesn't mean anyone is going to be arrested or charged criminally right away. That finding lays the groundwork, showing that there's enough evidence to consider prosecuting for contempt. But the ball is in the court of the Department of Justice, or maybe even a special prosecutor when it comes to deciding if charges will actually be filed. This decision-making process is where things get really tricky, especially since the Attorney General of the United States is among those named in the contempt finding. This creates a pretty obvious conflict of interest. It's likely that they'll need to bring in an outside counsel to handle any prosecution decisions stepping outside the usual channels of the Department of Justice. Today, I'll break down what Judge Boasberg's remarkable opinion really means. We'll dig into the specific actions he highlighted as blatant disregard for his court order, look at the case related to the Alien Enemies Act, and understand why this situation sparked such an unprecedented clash between the judiciary and the executive branch. We'll also explore what the probable cause finding translates to for Miller and the other officials involved, and what steps must occur next before this judicial clearance could actually lead to criminal prosecution and possible jail time for senior officials from the Trump administration. Let's take a closer look at the facts and legal findings that pushed Chief Judge Boasberg to make the rare decision to formally declare probable cause for criminal contempt against some of the highest-ranking officials in the Trump administration. Understanding the specifics of how the government went against the court's order and how the judge described and documented that behavior in his written opinion is crucial to grasping the full picture here. This case really stands out because it poses a whole new level of legal trouble for Stephen Miller and the other officials involved, something they haven't encountered before. At the heart of this historic showdown is the Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act, a law that goes all the way back to 1798. This law allows the president to detain and deport nationals from countries that the United States is at war with or that might invade American territory. Originally written during a time of real international tension, the Alien Enemies Act has been used in actual wars before, most infamously during World War II, when it contributed to the internment of Japanese Americans, a dark chapter in our history. It's honestly hard to believe that the Trump administration decided to use this old wartime law meant for actual military conflicts as the basis for conducting immigration enforcement against people who are living in the U.S. The administration claimed that issues with immigration flows and border security represented a unique emergency that warranted using wartime powers. This argument didn't sit well with civil rights groups and immigration advocates, who quickly pointed out that what they were suggesting was a dangerous and radical expansion of executive power, completely disconnected from the real wartime circumstances the law was intended to address. Judge Boasberg looked into the administration's actions regarding the Alien Enemies Act and laid down a clear court order on how they should carry out their detention and removal activities. This order put strict, legally binding limits in place to safeguard the due process rights protected by the Fifth Amendment for everyone within the United States. These rights are meant to apply to all people on American soil, no matter their immigration status. So there's been quite the stir over a federal court order that really turned things on their head. The order wasn't just some loose advice. It demanded that the government stick to specific protocols before they could take away anyone's freedom or kick them out of the country under the Alien Enemies Act. This wasn't open for interpretation or adjustment. The chief judge had the complete authority to issue such an order, and the executive branch was expected to obey it, no questions asked, even if they didn't agree with the judge's view on the law or Constitution. Then things got wild. What unfolded led to a finding of criminal contempt. And honestly, the specifics documented by Judge Boasberg were just extraordinary in how blatantly the administration ignored basic principles of judicial authority and due process. On March 16, 2025, the judge laid out that the administration acted with willful disregard for his prior order. We're not talking about some technical slip-up or a good faith disagreement here. This was straight up ignoring the guidelines. The government went ahead with detention and removal activities in a way that clearly went against what the court had set forth. People who should have received procedural protections were instead detained, processed, and in some cases forcibly removed from the U.S. All this happened without the safeguards designed to protect their rights before such drastic actions were taken. And get this, while doing all that, the administration was making claims to both the court and the public that they were following the rules. Judge Boasberg determined that these claims were flat-out false. No mistakes, just untruths. It's really something to see how all these pieces fit together. So it turns out there have been some pretty serious claims about the administration's behavior in court. They didn't just bend the rules a little. They were reportedly throwing out deliberate falsehoods aimed at making it look like they were following the law, when in reality they were blatantly defying it. A significant ruling came from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal appellate court that took a look at the broader Alien Enemies Act case. They echoed and built on Judge Boasberg's findings, highlighting how individuals like Bondi, Rubio, Miller, and Trump were using what the court called outright untruths to deny people their basic rights as protected by the Fifth Amendment. What makes this Fourth Circuit opinion even more important is that it's been formally referenced in a congressional impeachment resolution against Trump. The court's examination pointed out that the way the administration operated wasn't just a case of pushing legal limits. It involved a knowing deception of the courts and serious violations of constitutional rights, along with a blatant ignoring of binding judicial orders. The fact that both the Fourth Circuit and Judge Boasberg reached the same damning conclusion means something pretty crucial. It suggests that two independent federal courts at different levels of the judicial system looked at the facts and got to the same conclusion. That convergence wipes out any notion that Judge Boasberg's ruling was just the result of a personal grudge or political bias. Now, when it comes to Miller, his role in this mess is particularly precarious. His extraordinary vulnerability doesn't just stem from that specific contempt finding. It connects directly to his broader involvement as the main mind behind virtually every contentious immigration enforcement measure during both Trump terms. He's consistently been pointed out as a key player in these operations. The conversation around Miller is heating up, especially after the judge's findings. So here's the deal. Miller has been tagged as a key player responsible for a lot of the controversial policies we've seen. From the widely condemned family separation policy, which traumatized countless kids, to the aggressive tactics in immigration enforcement. When it comes to expedited removals and even invoking the Alien Enemies Act, you can see Miller's influence all over those moves. Groups like Common Cause and America's Voice are pushing Congress to look into Miller because of potential civil rights violations tied to his actions in immigration enforcement. There are also worries about self-deing related to contracts that seem to have benefited his personal and professional circles. A pretty serious accusation, to say the least. And now, with the judge's ruling on criminal contempt, Miller finds himself in a tighter spot than before. It moves his situation from just being about political disagreements and policy decisions to something much more serious, a federal crime. This is a turning point. The judge's ruling is a big deal in the ongoing legal clash between the Trump administration and the federal judiciary. However, navigating from this finding to real consequences for Miller will not be easy. There are major legal and political hurdles ahead that need to be understood clearly. The main takeaway here is that this probable cause finding is a significant legal marker. It's a moment that changes how we talk about accountability when it comes to Miller and his actions. So here's the scoop on those in the hot seat after this latest opinion drop. Before this, all the legal tussles between the administration and the courts about immigration enforcement were handled under civil contempt rules. That's basically a framework aimed at getting people to comply with court orders in the future rather than punishing past offenses. But the judge switched things up big time by taking the whole situation from civil matters to criminal contempt, actually finding probable cause for federal crimes committed by some high-profile officials. This is not something that can be swept under the rug or played down. It's a significant judicial move that's now etched in the official court records for good. We've got names like Stephen Miller, Pam Bondi, Marco Rubio, and Donald Trump all being called out. Their actions are laid out in painstaking detail over several pages, which, let me tell you, is quite an eye-opener. The judge pointed out their blatant disregard for a binding court order, highlighting deliberate falsehoods and systemic violations of due process that targeted some of the most vulnerable folks in the U.S. And in the most serious terms possible, the conclusion reached by the judge is that there's enough evidence to suggest these individuals should face criminal prosecution. Now, this finding is going to shadow each of these individuals for the rest of their careers and lives, popping up in every legal battle they find themselves in. It will be referenced in any congressional investigation looking into this chapter of American governance, and will definitely be a hot topic in all the historical discussions about how this administration interacted with the law and the judiciary. Even if criminal charges never come to fruition, this finding is a permanent mark of accountability that no amount of political wrangling or media spin can erase. The second big point here is the real life and political hurdles that lie between this probable cause finding and any actual criminal prosecutions. There are some genuinely tough challenges ahead, but the fact that this finding exists has made it all the more complicated. This whole situation is about to get a lot messier for the administration, which is already struggling with its shaky legal standing and public image. Normally, when federal judges hand down contempt referrals, they get sent over to the Department of Justice for action, since that's the agency tasked with handling federal crimes. However, this particular case hits a major snag because Attorney General Pam Bondi is one of the officials directly named in the contempt finding. It's a tricky spot for her. She can't oversee or make decisions about a case in which she's basically being pointed out as a possible wrongdoer. That conflict of interest is glaringly obvious, making it almost necessary to appoint a special prosecutor or independent counsel. This would mean bringing in someone completely outside the usual Department of Justice hierarchy who could evaluate the evidence Judge Boaz has gathered without being swayed by the political interests of any officials involved, including the potential targets of prosecution. If independent counsel were brought in to go after criminal contempt charges against the Attorney General, the Deputy Chief of Staff, the Secretary of State, and possibly even the President, it would create a significant turn of events in both the legal and political landscape. This independent proceeding would be one the administration couldn't manipulate or sway through its typical authority over the Justice Department. On top of that, if the administration refused to allow such an appointment, that stance would spark a whole new wave of legal and political trouble, reinforcing the narrative that this executive branch sees itself as above the law and sidesteps the accountability measures that apply to everyone else in our government. So when you look at Judge Bosberg's opinion, it stands out as a serious judicial escalation in this whole saga. There's been an ongoing clash between the federal courts and an administration that has treated court orders like they're optional. Instead of following lawful commands, it often defies them, making decisions based on political calculations. The recent finding of criminal contempt didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's part of a wider pattern of disregarding court orders. This has led to emergency hearings and tight deadlines across various federal courts, touching on different areas of federal law and policy. What's really noteworthy about Judge Bauer's actions is how he has taken things a step further than other judges facing similar defiance. Instead of sticking to civil enforcement methods, which have clearly failed to prompt any real compliance, he has switched to the criminal enforcement framework. This is the most serious action the system can impose, and it ultimately leads to imprisonment. His ruling clearly sends a strong message not just to Stephen Miller and the others involved, but to the entire executive branch. It shows that the federal judiciary is ready to use its most serious enforcement powers against top government officials when they ignore judicial orders. What really stands out here is how significant this criminal contempt finding could be for Stephen Miller, as well as the future of this presidency and what comes afterward. Miller crafted his career and gained a lot of influence in the Trump circle based on a core belief that the goals of strict immigration enforcement were so vital that any means were justified to achieve them. The importance of border security and immigration control resonated strongly with the political base, enough to endorse tactics that bent the rules. Stephen Miller, over the years, operated under the assumption that he could push the limits set by federal courts without facing serious consequences. He figured that the political perks of strict enforcement would always outweigh any legal repercussions that might eventually catch up with him. He thought that the worst he'd face would be some civil lawsuits, a few scoldings from judges, or maybe a fine here and there. All costs he believed he could manage without any real impact on his life. Well, that whole game plan just got a serious wake-up call. Judge Boer, in an important federal district court, has now made it crystal clear to Miller that his actions, along with those of his colleagues in the Trump administration, have gone past the line of aggressive policy decisions into what looks like probable criminal contempt of court. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. The judge has put it in writing that the evidence suggests charges could be on the table. Now, we're not just talking about fines or warnings. We're talking potential federal prison time. This shift in the legal landscape is monumental because it means there's a solid foundation for imprisonment if a prosecutor decides to act on the judge's findings. The real issue now lies in whether a prosecutor, one who has the independence and guts to follow through, will choose to take this path that's been laid out. Miller spent years operating under the belief that the courts wouldn't really hold him accountable for the fallout of his immigration policies. With the chief judge's formal opinion now on the record, it's clear that accountability isn't just a distant thought. It's very much on the table. What happens next will show whether the rule of law in America genuinely means something, or if it's just a phrase that gets tossed around by those in power when it suits them. It seems the road to prison is now clear, and what happens next will really show us how the rule of law holds up against the big players in government. This situation has shifted from a legal issue to one of whether the prosecutors are willing to take action. It's a pretty crucial moment for all of us. If you found this breakdown useful, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe. I'll be here keeping you updated on every twist and turn as it happens. You definitely won't want to miss what's coming.